I really gotta fix that sequence. But hey everyone, good evening. Or whichever time zone you may happen to be existing in. It is Thursday, so we are again going to read some more Sherlock Holmes. I had mentioned on Twitter, because I'm still not going to call it X, that I only have 2 more stories left in my current book. After that, there's only 1 more book of the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes. And that will be his final bow. So, I'm not sure if I want to read other authors' Sherlock Holmes. I might read some of those contemporaries, because I do have the books The Rivals of Sherlock Holmes, which is actually something Matsu had suggested that we could read together. I still haven't figured out how we're going to arrange that yet, or if. And hey, Taka. Congrats on getting first. Pretty good. Just getting started. Post this back up. Yeah, if people haven't voted in it, they can still determine whether or not I'm going to continue in Live 2D format or switch back to my old PNG, which honestly I would think would be a little disappointing since I've put so much effort into setting things up so I can do the Live 2D. But we are doing Sherlock Holmes tonight. And like I was saying a bit earlier, I only have 2 stories remaining in the current book. And then I'll have to switch Sherlock Holmes books to the last one, the actual last one that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote. And that might take me a couple of weeks to get through on a regular reading schedule. I did start today a little bit later because I wasn't really paying attention to the time. And, well, it's already 9:05. So another 5 minutes before I usually start the reading anyway. Well, my Thursdays and Fridays are just story reading anyway. Not like last night with my impromptu Valentine's Day stream. As Thursday, or I would say adult literature, just because they're not meant for kids, and then Friday's always going to be fairy tales. So. And even if I run out of regular fairy tale books, I've got so many other novels I can do that for. So. Oh yeah, and the assumptions that I made at the very beginning of the stream yesterday about who the main characters were, I was actually right. So, personally, I'm always going to stick to the brunette waifu with the purple eyes. If anyone's seen pictures of Kel, she's a magenta-haired fox with purple eyes. So, yeah. I have a type. about the time I was almost done with the game last night, like 4 a.m., my router decided to reboot itself. So there were 3 minutes of me playing the game with it not being streamed. So I went ahead and put the full recorded version up on YouTube. It's not going to pop up until 4 o'clock tomorrow, but it'll be there. And as much as it's a game that would have multiple endings, because you can... Well, my router's set to do that because normally I'm not on at 4 a.m. I didn't really expect to be on at 4 a.m. last night. Yeah, it was a good game. I really liked the story behind it. So, I know it has more playability, but when I get the ending that I kind of wanted the first time around, I don't really see a reason to go back and play it again. But as I said, it's a fun game. A couple of people said they'd played it, so. I mean, if I was going to choose anyone else in the game, it would have probably been Scarlet, the scientist who you first meet in the library. Yeah, she actually protested about being typecast as a gamer gremlin. Well, that's at the end of it when they had gotten into the secret lab and found the files on them. She complained about being cast as a gamer gremlin. It's like the entire story was building up to pretty much what I guessed it would have been. So I think that's one of the downsides about being a storyteller, is I can kind of see the story as it's playing out. It's like, even before the second round of the game, Kat was way too familiar with the main character to them not being able to have a past. Yeah, like a magician watching another one, if you understand the tricks, it kind of gets boring after a while, really. But if you get engrossed in a good story, you're going to finish the story. It's like one of the main reasons I read fairy tales is because all of the fairy tales are still fairly relevant. If you look at them and put them in modern perspective, the stories are still there, and people are still ignoring the morals of them. I mean, it's honestly one of the downsides about being immortal, is you just keep seeing patterns over and over again to the point that you're predicting things, and then people think you're crazy for predicting them, and, you know, they ignore the fact that you told them exactly what was going to happen. Which, honestly, is one of the things about Sherlock Holmes. So we just kind of circle back around to that one. Because Sherlock Holmes actually mentions that he keeps a criminal library, and when he starts seeing things that look suspicious and remind him of other cases, he uses that information to solve the current one. They said the only person he ever really had problem with seeing what was going on was Moriarty, and of course the woman, because they were the only ones who didn't do what he expected. So, observation just brings you back to being able to predict the outcomes. I mean, even on the event that Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty fought at the falls, Sherlock Holmes had a feeling what was going to be happening, so he just asked Moriarty for the pleasure to leave a note behind. Because he knew that, well, Sherlock Holmes didn't expect either himself or Moriarty to survive at the falls. And Sherlock Holmes barely survived. But Moriarty had planned that Sherlock Holmes might survive, so he had a second person there to try to kill him if he had failed himself. So, yeah. History repeats itself, and those who can see that can predict the future. Which is why I really don't like what I've been seeing going on in the world today. But that's another subject entirely. Let's see. Go ahead and get to my regular study because I don't want to switch to the old school yet. I'd actually feel bad about switching back to the other version because then all the work that went into my models would be essentially pointless. I mean, Fantasy did a great job on this one. She's technically, well, I don't know if she's still working on my newer one or not. But then Dusk did my chibi, and I don't want all that work going to nothing. Which I think people would understand, but everyone's voting for me to go back to my 2D, my PNG version. I mean, I've even made a PNG version of my model, just for the hell of it, but I can't add things to the PNG version like I can this one. Well, I keep thinking I could do more gaming if I didn't have to worry about my Live 2D taking up processor space. But I'm not that much of a gamer, honestly. And honestly, my stream last night kind of proves why, because I get obsessed in the game, completely lose track of time, and don't think about eating, drinking, or taking breaks. Which is really why I try not to game so much anymore, because I used to be really bad about that. Well, yeah, I didn't take a picture of the Cafe Leche bottle, but there's maybe an inch worth in the bottom of that bottle now. And that's on top of the other things I was drinking. Tonight I actually have stuff to hydrate with. But anyway, I should probably get into reading. Let me make sure that my background audio is working properly. Hey, Legacy, welcome on in. Thank you for the follow, Emperor Panda. So, how was the rest of your stream? Tech issues? Oh, I know how that is. That's like consistency for me. Yes, I have 2 stories left of the Return of Sherlock Holmes. So she used Harden. Oh, Frozen. Yeah, I get that problem too, but that's usually because my graphics processor gets bogged down. Then occasionally my phone decides that it wants to be on a different network than my laptop, and suddenly I don't have model interaction anymore. It wouldn't be so bad if, I didn't have access to my neighbor's Wi-Fi, but my phone likes to use theirs too. Well, it's easy for my neighbor to use my neighbor's Wi-Fi because I had to set it up for them. And honestly, you think mine would be stronger since I'm maybe 10 feet away from my router, but theirs would be at least 20 to 25 feet away. I should get a stronger signal from mine so I don't have to rely on theirs, but nevertheless, I know their password. Of course, it also doesn't help that they're my parents. But yeah, I've had to set up. The downside of it being an employee and people knowing that technical issues is that there's at least 5 people in this neighborhood who rely on me for tech service, but none of them pay me. But yeah, somehow I managed to end up renting the house next door to my parents. So they're my neighbors. But yeah, I did have to set up their Wi-Fi too. Set up their Wi-Fi, set up neighbors across the street cell phone service. Yeah, you think my dad wouldn't need me to come over to do technical service considering he spent most of his working career in cybersecurity. I mean, once he retired, he just gave up on learning. He didn't want to do it anymore. That's like the last. He's the reason that I started learning computers when I was like 5. That's like when I was maybe 7 or 8. I was already learning how to program in BASIC. And then I decided to go into the arts and video, and well, here I am. And why am I getting all these messages now that I'm trying to stream? What the hell? Oh, I have 2 associate degrees. One of them is in radio and television production. The other one is in technical theater design. But I ended up getting out of college, when I ran out of financial aid because the university made me retake everything I had taken to get the associate degrees. So I was working and oh yeah, she's definitely gonna love SCP stories. They're fun. She does get spooked easily, but SCP's not really that scary, honestly. But yeah, I think I stopped working on video editing when I was in Premiere 3.2. But that was also literally 2 decades ago. Yeah, I always laugh about the fact that my old tower that I'm not using has a FireWire port built into it. I had one of the earlier digital 8mm home video recorders, well, home cameras, which I still have and it still works. And it's literally one that has a FireWire connection on it too. But now technology has gotten past what I'm able to afford. What's really funny is my old Adobe programs still work. And I think that's the only reason why Adobe went to subscription plans to, my $1,000 programs from 2000 are still working fine. I just don't use them anymore because, honestly, it's really hard to find a computer that even has a CD drive for me to install and stuff with. But I know enough about networking in my own house that I have installed software from other computers to my laptop. So remote installation is fun. Shy Guy is a tricky one. He's an introvert with an attitude issue. I've got multiple laptops, but my workspace doesn't give me room to use more than one. Well, my laptop currently right now is just on a little rolling laptop desk. But considering this house's size, I don't really have much room to change furniture around much. But if and when I start doing this from my actual library, which is one that's one of the book rooms that I've got bookcases on at least 2 of the walls and in the closet. I may try to rearrange that one so I can try to get things set up. But until then, I'm just streaming from my laptop. I'd stream from my tower, but due to power issues in its past, it is not reliable for a steady stream. But I have one friend that's seeing about getting stuff together to build me a new tower, so If that happens, I may be able to do a little bit more. Let's see. I got running behind. I'm getting chat. So. Actually, I'm not in my chair right in the scene. What the heck? Supposed to be a little higher in the chair. Did I lock myself? Yeah, I did. Okay. Supposed to be sitting higher. Okay. I didn't see. Oh, a swoop bat. Okay. But anyway, Return of Sherlock Holmes. I've only got 2 stories left in this book. And then I guess I'm good to go to his final bow after this one's done. And then I'll have to see what I'm going to do after Sherlock Holmes. Well, at least after the Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes. And if anyone hasn't been able to catch the streams, I know, Matthew, when I was telling you that I was trying to rearrange all the Sherlock Holmes stories chronologically, based off of Baron Gould's book, I've set up the playlist with the individual stories in that order. I think it took me half a day to get all the stories in order. When I had the ones that I had already gotten recorded, those were fine. Then I've just been kind of adding them to the playlist as I go. Let's see. Pull that up real quick. Okay. Like I've got 101 videos on that playlist right now. But considering the playlist is the individual short stories and the chapters of the full book ones. Oh, my favorite recipe? I don't think I have one. It's been too long since I've gone over the list, and there always seem to be new ones popping up. The Tickle Monster. That is a good one. The fact that it's helpful. I don't know if I want to narrate the SCP stories for a Halloween stream or not. I may do that someday. At least I wouldn't have to worry about the copyright since everything on there is common use. Okay, no shit again though. Ouch. from September 1904. Nice. Okay. I wonder if there's a way I can add padding to my microphone stand so it doesn't pick up vibrations on my desk. When day breaks. I'm gonna have to look at that one again. Let's see, what's my mic at? Okay. Uh-huh. Anyway, I need to get into the story. So everyone feel free to get comfortable if you need to go to do anything. By all means, you can. I do thank you for the raid because it's always nice to get a good raid. And we're going to go ahead and get into the stories. And our first story for tonight, The Adventure of Abbey Grange. It was a bitterly cold, frosty morning during the winter of '97 that I was awakened by a tugging at my shoulder. It was Holmes. The candle in his hand shone upon his eager, stooping face and told me at a glance that something was amiss. "Come, Watson, come," he cried. "The game is afoot. Not a word. Into your clothes and come." 10 minutes later, we were both in a cab and rattling through the silent streets on our way to Charing Cross Station. The first faint winter's dawn was beginning to appear, and we could dimly see the occasional figure of an early workman as he passed us, blurred and indistinct in the opalescent London reek. Holmes nestled in silence into his heavy coat, and I was glad to do the same, for the air was most bitter, and neither of us had broken the fast. It was not until we had consumed some hot tea at the station and taken our places at Kentish train that we were sufficiently thawed, he to speak and I to listen. Holmes drew a note from his pocket and read it aloud. Abbey Grange, Marsham, Kent. 3:30 a.m. My dear Mr. Holmes, I should be very glad for your immediate assistance in what promises to be a most remarkable case. It is something quite in your line. Except for releasing the lady, I will see that everything is kept exactly as I found it. But I beg you not to lose an instant, as it is difficult to leave Sir Eustace there. Yours faithfully, Stanley Hopkins. Hopkins has called me 7 times, and on each occasion his summons has been entirely justified, said Holmes. I fancy that every one of his cases has found its way into our collection, and I must admit, Watson, that you have some power of selection that atones for which must I deplore in your narratives. Your fatal habit of looking at everything from the point of view of a story instead of as a scientific exercise has ruined what might have been an instructive and even classical series of demonstrations. Your slur over work of the utmost finesse, and the delicacy in order to dwell upon sensational details which may excite, but cannot possibly instruct the reader. Why do you not write them yourself? I said, with some bitterness. I will, my dear Watson, I will. At present I am, as you know, fairly busy, But I propose to devote my declining years to the composition of a textbook, which shall focus the whole art of deduction into one volume. One present research appears to be the cause of murder.
You think that Sir Eustace is dead, then?
I would say so. Hopkins' writing shows considerable agitation. He is not an emotional man. Yes, I gather there has been violence, and that the body is left for our inspection. A mere suicide would not have caused him to send for me. As to the release of the lady, it would appear that she has been locked in her room during the tragedy. We are moving in high life, Watson. Crackling paper. E.B. Monogram. Coat of arms. Picturesque address. I think that the friend Hopkins will live up to his reputation, and that we shall have an interesting morning. The crime was committed before 12 last night.
How can you possibly tell?
By the inspection of the trains and by the reckoning of time. The local police had to be called in, and they had to communicate with Scotland Yard. Hopkins had to go out, and he in turn had to send for me. All that makes a fair night's work. Well, here we are at Chilsington Station, and we shall soon set our doubts to rest.
Drive a couple of miles through the narrow country lanes brought us to a park gate, which was opened for us by an old lodge-keeper whose haggard face bore the reflection of some great disaster. The avenue ran through a noble park between lines of ancient elms and ended in a low, widespread house, pillared in the front after the fashion of Palladio. The central part was evidently of great age and shrouded in ivy, but the large windows showed that modern changes had been carried out, and one wing of the house appeared to be entirely new. The youthful figure and eager, alert face of Inspector Stanley Hopkins confronted us in the open doorway.
I'm very glad you came, Mr. Holmes, and you too, Dr. Watson. But indeed, if I had my time over again, I should not have troubled you, for since the lady has come out, she has given herself so clear an account of the affair that there is not much left for us to do. You remember the Lewisham gang of burglars? What, the three Randalls? Exactly, the father and two sons. It's their work, I have no doubt of it. They did a job in Sydenham a fortnight ago, and they were as seen as described. Rather cool to do another so soon and so near, but it is they, beyond all doubt. It's a hanging matter this time. So Eustace is dead, then? Yes, his head was knocked in with his own poker. Sir Eustace Brackenstall, the driver tells me. Exactly, one of the richest men in Kent. Lady Brackenstall is in the morning room. Poor lady. She has had the most dreadful experience. She seemed half dead when I saw her first. I think you had best see her and hear her account of the facts. Then we will examine the dining room together.
Lady Brackenstall was no ordinary person. Seldom have I seen so graceful a figure, so womanly a presence, and so beautiful a face. She was a blonde, golden-haired, blue-eyed, and would, no doubt, have been the perfect complexion which goes with such colouring had not recent experiences left her drawn and haggard. Her sufferings were physical as well as mental, for over one eye rose a hideous plum-coloured welting, which her maid, a tall, austere woman, was bathing audaciously with vinegar and water. The lady lay back, exhausted upon the couch, but her quick, observant gaze as we entered the room, and the alert expression of her beautiful features, showed that neither her wit nor her courage had been shaken by her terrible experience. She was enveloped in a loose dressing gown of blue and silver, but a black sequined-covered dinner dress was hung upon the couch beside her.
I have told you all happened, Mr. Hopkins, she said wearily. Could you not repeat it for me? Well, if you think it necessary, I will tell these gentlemen what occurred. Have they been in the dining room yet? I thought they'd better hear from your ladyships very first. I shall be glad to, when you can arrange matters. It is horrible to me to think of him still lying there.
She shuddered and buried her face for a moment in her hands. As she did so, the loose gown fell back from her forearms. Holmes uttered an exclamation.
You have other injuries, madam. What is this?
Two vivid red spot stood out among the white round dims. She hastily covered it.
It is nothing. It has no connection with the hideous business of last night. If you and your friend will sit down, I will tell you all I can. I am the wife of Sir Eustace Brackenstall. I have been married about a year. I suppose that is no use of my attempting to conceal that our marriage has not been a happy one. I fear that all our neighbors would tell you that, even if I were to attempt to deny it. Perhaps the fault may be partly mine. I was brought up in the freer, less conventional atmosphere of South Australia, and this English life with its proprieties and primness is not congenial to me. The main reason lies in the one fact which is notorious to everyone, and that is that Sir Eustace was a confirmed drunkard. To be with such a man for an hour is unpleasant. Can you imagine what it means for a sensitive and high-spirited woman to be tied to him for night and day? It is sacrilege, a crime, a villainy to hold that such a marriage is binding. I say that these monstrous laws of yours will bring a curse upon the land. Heaven will not let such wickedness endure.
For an instant she sat up, her cheeks flushed and her eyes blazing from under the terrible mark upon her brow. Then the strong, soothing hand of the Astora maid drew her head down to the cushion, and the wild anger died away into a passionate sobbing. At last she continued.
I will tell you about last night. You are aware, perhaps, that in this house all servants sleep in the modern wing. The central block is made up of the dwelling rooms, with the kitchen behind and our bedrooms above. My maid Teresa sleeps above my room. There is no one else, and no sound could alarm those who are in the farther wing. This may have been known to the robbers, or they would not have acted the way they did. Sir Eustace retired about 10:30. The servants had already gone to their quarters. Only my maid was up, and she had remained in her room at the top of the house until I needed her services. I sat until after 11 in this room, absorbed in a book. Then I walked round to see that all was right before I went upstairs. It was my custom to do this myself, for, as I explained, Sir Eustace was not always to be trusted. I went into the kitchen, the butler's pantry, the gun room, the billiard room, the drawing room, and finally the dining room. As I approached the window, which is covered with thick curtains, I suddenly felt the wind blow upon my face and realized that it was open. I flung the curtain aside and found myself face to face with a broad-shouldered elderly man who had just stepped into the room. The window is a long French one, which really forms the door leading to the lawn. I held my bedroom candle lit in my hand, and by its light, behind the first man I saw two others, who were in the act of entering. I stepped back, but the fellow was on me in an instant. He caught me first with the wrist and then by the throat. I opened my mouth to scream, but he struck me with such a savage blow that his fist over my eye, and felled me to the ground. I must have been unconscious for a few minutes, for when I came to myself, I found that they had torn down the bell rope and had secured me tightly by the oaken chair which stands at the head of the dining room table. I was so firmly bound that I could not move, and a handkerchief round my mouth prevented me from uttering any sound. It was at this instant that my unfortunate husband entered the room. He had evidently heard some suspicious sounds, and he came prepared for such a scene as he found. He was dressed in a shirt and trousers, with his favorite blackthorn cudgel in his hand. He rushed at one of the burglars, but another, it was the elderly man, stooped and picked up poker from the grate and struck him a terrible blow as he passed. He fell with a groan, and never moved again. I fainted once more, but again it could only have been a very few minutes during which I was insensible. When I opened my eyes, I found that they had collected the silver from the sideboard, and they had drawn the bottle of wine and stood there. Each of them had a glass in his hand. I have already told you, have I not, that one was elderly, with a beard, and the other two young hairless lads. They might have been the father and his two sons. They talked together in whispers. They came over and made sure that I was still securely bound. Finally, they withdrew, closing the window after them. It was quite a quarter of an hour before I got my mouth free. When I did so, my screams brought the maid to my assistance. The other servants were soon alarmed, and we sent for the local police, who instantly communicated with London. That is really all I can tell you, gentlemen, and I trust that it will not be necessary for me to go over so painful a story again.
Do you have any questions, Mr. Holmes?
asked Hopkins.
I will not impose any further tax upon Lady Brackenstall's patience and time,
said Holmes.
Before I go into the dining room, I should be glad to hear your experience.
He looked at the maid.
I saw the men before they ever came into the house, said she. As I sat at my bedroom window, I saw 3 men in the moonlight down by the lodge gate yonder, but I thought nothing of it at the time. It was more than an hour after I'd heard my mistress scream, and I ran down to find her, poor lamb, just as she says, and him on the floor with his blood and brains all over the room. It was enough to drive a woman out of her wits, tied there, and her very dress spotted with him. But she never wanted courage. Had Miss Mary Fraser of Adelaide and Miss Lady Brackenstall of Abbey Grange hasn't learned new ways. You've questioned long enough, you gentlemen, and now she is coming to her room, and with her old Teresa, to get the rest of that she badly needs.
With a motherly tenderness, the giant woman put her arm around the mistress and led her from the room.
She has been with her all of her life,
said Hopkins.
Nursed her from a baby and came with her to England when they first left Australia 18 months ago. Teresa Wright is her name, and the kind of maid you don't pick up nowadays. This way, Mr. Holmes, if you please.
The keen interest had passed out of Holmes's expressive face, and I knew that with all the mystery, all the charm of the case had departed. There still remained an arrest to be effected, and what were these commonplace rogues that he should soil his hands with them? An abstruse and learned specialist who finds that he's been called in for a case of measles will experience something of an annoyance, which I read in my friend's eyes. Yet the scene at the dining room of the Abbey Grange was sufficiently strange to arrest his attention and to recall his wonted expression. It was a very large and high chamber, with a carved oak ceiling, oak paneling, and a fine array of deer's heads and ancient weapons around the walls. At the farther end of the door was a high French window of which we had heard. 3 smaller windows on the right-hand side filled the apartment with a cold winter sunshine. On the left, a large, deep fireplace with a massive, overhanging oak mantelpiece. Beside the fireplace was a heavy oaken chair with arms and crossbars at the bottom. In and out through the open woodwork was woven a crimson cord, which was secured at each side by a crosspiece below. In releasing the lady, the cord had slipped off of her, but the knots with which it had been secured still remained. These details only struck our attention afterwards, for our thoughts were entirely absorbed by the terrible object which lay spread upon the tiger-skinned hearthrug in front of the fire. It was the body of a tall, well-made man about 40 years of age. He lay upon his back, his face upturned, and his white teeth grinning through the short black beard. His 2 clenched hands were raised above his head, and a heavy black thorn stick lay across them. His dark, handsome, aquiline features were convulsed into a spasm of vindictive hatred, which had set his face in a terrible, fiendish expression. He had evidently been in his bed when the alarm had broken out, and he wore a foppish embroidered nightshirt, and his bare feet projected from his trousers. His head was horribly injured, and the whole room bore witness to the savage ferocity of the blow which had struck him down. Beside him lay a heavy poker, bent into a curve by the concussion. Holmes examined both it and the indescribable wreck which it had wrought.
"He must be a powerful man, this elder Randall," he remarked. "Yes," said Hopkins. "I have some record of the fellow, and he is a rough customer." "You should have no difficulty in getting him?" "Not in the slightest. We've been on the look for him, and there was some idea that he got away to America. Now that we know the gang is here, and I don't see how they can escape. We have news at every seaport already, and a reward will be offered before evening. What beats me is how they could have done so mad a thing, knowing that the lady could describe them, and that they would not fail to recognize the description." "Exactly. One would have expected that they would have silenced Lady Brackenstall as well." "They may not have realized. I suggested that she had recovered from her faint." "That is likely enough. If she seems to be senseless, they would not take her life. What about this poor fellow Hopkins? I seem to have heard some queer stories about him." "He was a good-hearted man when he was sober, but a perfect fiend when he was drunk, and rather when he was half-drunk, for he seldom really went the whole way. The devil seemed to be in him at such times, and he was capable of anything. From what I hear, in spite of all his wealth and his title, he very nearly came our way once or twice. There was a scandal about him drenching a dog with petroleum and setting it on fire, her ladyship's dog, to make the matter worse, and that was only hushed up with difficulty. Then we threw a decanter at the maid, Teresa Wright. There was trouble with that. On the whole, between ourselves, it will be a brighter house without him. What are you looking at now?"
Holmes was down on his knees examining with great attention the knots upon the red cord with which the lady had been secured. Then he carefully scrutinized the broken and frayed end where it had been snapped off. Then the burglar had dragged it down.
"When this was pulled down, the bell in the kitchen must have rung soundly," he remarked. "No one could hear it. The kitchen stands right at the back of the house." "How did the burglar know no one would hear it? How dared he pull at the bell rope in a reckless fashion?" "Exactly, Mr. Holmes, exactly. You put the very question which I have asked myself time and again. There can be no doubt that this fellow must have known the house and its habits. He must have perfectly understood that the servants would all be in bed at that comparatively early hour, and that no one would possibly hear a bell ring in the kitchen. Therefore, he must have been in close league with one of the servants. Surely that's evident. But there are 8 servants, and all were of good character." "Other things being equal," said Holmes, "one wouldn't suspect the one at whose head the master threw the decanter. And yet that would involve treachery towards the mistress, to whom the woman seemed devoted." "Oh, well, the point is a minor one, and when you have Randall, you will probably find no difficulty in securing his accomplice. The lady's story certainly seems to be corroborated, if needed corroboration, by every detail which we see before us."
He walked to the French window and threw it open.
"There are no signs here, but the ground is iron-hard, and one could not expect them. I see that these candles on the mantelpiece have been lighted." "Oh, yes, it was by their light that the lady's bedroom candle that the burglars saw their way around." "And what did they take?" "Well, they did not take much, only half a dozen articles of plate off the sideboard. Lady Brackenstall thinks that they were themselves so disturbed by the death of Sir Eustace that they did not ransack the home as they would otherwise have done." "No doubt that is true, and yet they drank some wine, I understand." "To steady their own nerves?" "Exactly. These 3 glasses upon the sideboard have been untouched, I suppose." "Yes, and the bottle stands as they left it." "Let us look at it. Hello, what's this?"
3 glasses were grouped together, one of them tinged with wine and one of them containing some dregs of bees' wing. The bottle stood between them, 2/3 full, and beside it lay a deep-stained cork. Its appearance and the dust upon the bottle showed that it was no commonplace vintage which the murderers had enjoyed. A change had come over Holmes's manner. He had lost his listless expression again, and I saw the alert light of interest in his keen, deep-set eyes. He raised the cork and examined it minutely.
"How did they draw it?"
he asked. Hopkins pointed at a half-open drawer. In it lay some table linen and a large corkscrew.
"Did Lady Brackenstall say the corkscrew was used?"
"No, I don't remember that it was senseless at the moment when the bottle was opened."
"Quite so. As a matter of fact, that screw was not used. This bottle was opened by a pocket screw, probably contained with a knife, and not one more than 1.5 inches long. If you examine the top of the cork, you will observe that the screw was driven in 3 times before the cork was extracted. It has never been transfixed. This long screw would have been transfixed and drawn. It's a single pull. When you catch this fellow, you'll find that he has one of these multiplex knives in his possession."
"Excellent," said Hopkins.
"But these glasses do puzzle me, I confess. Lady Brackenstall actually saw the 3 men drinking, did she not?"
"Yes, she was clear about that."
"And then is an end of it. What more can be said? And yet you must admit that 3 glasses are so remarkable, Hopkins. What you see, nothing remarkable. Well, let it pass. Perhaps when a man has special knowledge and special powers like my own, it rather encourages him to seek a complex explanation when a simpler one is at hand. Of course, it must be a mere chance about these glasses. Well, good morning, Hopkins. I don't see that I can be of any use to you, and you appear to have your case very clear. You will let me know when Randall is arrested and any further developments which may occur. I trust that I shall soon have to congratulate you upon a successful conclusion. Come, Watson, I fancy that we may employ ourselves more profitably at home."
During our return journey, I could see by Holmes's face that he was much puzzled by something which he had observed. Every now and then, by an effort, he would throw off the expression and talk as if the matter was clear, and then his doubts would settle down upon him again, and his knitted brows and abstracted eyes would show that his thoughts had gone back once more to the dining room of the Abbey Grange, in which this midnight tragedy had been enacted. At last, by a sudden impulse, just as our train was crawling out of the suburban station, he sprang out to the platform and pulled me out with him. "Excuse me, my dear fellow," said he, as we watched our rear carriages of our train disappearing around the curve. "I'm very sorry to make you the victim of what may seem a mere whim, but on my life, Watson, I simply can't leave the case in this conclusion. Every instinct that I possess cries out against it. It's wrong. It's all wrong. I swear that it's wrong. And yet the lady's story was complete. The maid's cooperation was sufficient. Every detail was fairly exact. What have I put against it? 3 wine glasses. That is all. But I have not taken things for granted. If I have examined everything with the care which I would have shown had we approached the case de novo, and had no cut-and-dry stories warp my mind, would I have not found something more definite to go upon? Of course I should. Sit down on this bench, Watson, until a train for Chislehurst arrives, and allow me to lay the evidence before you, imploring you at first instance to dismiss from your mind the idea that anything which the maid or her mistress may have said must be necessarily true. The lady's charming personality must not be permitted to warp our judgment. Surely there are details in the story which it looked like in blood would excite our suspicion.
These burglars made a considerable haul at Syndenham a fortnight ago. Some accident of them or their appearance was in the papers, and would naturally occur to anyone who wished to invent a story in which the imaginary robber should play a part. As a matter of fact, burglars who have done a good stroke of business are, as a rule, only too glad to enjoy the proceeds in peace and quiet without embarking on another perilous undertaking. Again,
It is unusual for burglars to operate at so early an hour. It is unusual for burglars to strike a lady to prevent her from screaming, since one would imagine that was a sure way to make her scream. It is unusual for them to commit murder when their numbers are insufficient to overpower one man. It is unusual for them to be content in a limited plunder when there is much more within their reach. And finally, I should say that it is very unusual for such men to leave a bottle half empty. What do you say of these unusual things strike you, Watson?
These circumstances' effect is certainly considerable, and yet each of them is quite impossible by itself. The most usual thing of all is it seems to me that the lady should be tied to the chair.
Well, I'm not so clear about that, Watson, for it is evident that they must either kill her or else secure her in such a way that, should she be capable of immediate notice of their escape. But at any rate, I have shown, have I not, that there is a certain element of improbability about the lady's story. And now on top of this comes the incident of the wine glasses.
What about the wine glasses?
Can you see them in your mind's eye?
I see them clearly.
We were told that 3 men drank from them. Does that strike you as not likely?
Why not? There was wine in each glass.
Exactly. There was bee's wing only in 1 glass. You must have noticed that. What does that suggest to your mind?
The last glass filled would be the most likely to contain beeswax.
Not at all. The bottle was full of it, and it is inconceivable that the first 2 glasses were clear and that the third heavily charged with it. There are 2 possible explanations, and only 2. One is that after the second glass was filled, the bottle was violently agitated, and so the third glass received the bee's wing. That does not appear probable. No, I'm sure I'm right.
What then do you suppose?
That only 2 glasses were used, and that the dregs of both were poured into the third glass to give it the false impression that 3 people had been there. In that way, all the bee's wing would be in the last glass, would it not? Yes, I am convinced that this is true, but I have hit upon the true explanation of this one small phenomenon. Then, in an instant, the case rises to the commonplace, to the exceedingly remarkable, for it can only mean that Lady Brackenstall and her maid have deliberately lied to us, and not one word of their story is to be believed, that they have some very strong reason for covering the real criminal, and that we must construct our case for ourselves without any help from them. That is the mission which now lies before us, and here, Watson, is the Chislehurst train.
The household of Abbey Grange were much surprised at our return, but Sherlock Holmes, finding that Stanley Hopkins had gone off to report to headquarters, took possession of the dining room, locked the door upon the inside, and devoted himself for 2 hours to one of those minute and laborious investigations which formed the solid basis on which his brilliant efficacies deducted were reared. Seated in a corner like an interested student who deserves a demonstration of his professor, I followed every step of that remarkable search. The window, the carpet, the curtains, the chair, the rope, each of them, in turn, was minutely examined, duly pondered. The body of the unfortunate baronet had been removed, but all else remained as had been seen this morning. Then, to my astonishment, Holmes climbed up to the massive mantelpiece. Far above his head hung a few inches of the red cord which was still attached to the wire. For a long time he gazed upwards at it, and then, in an attempt to get nearer to it, he raised his knee upon the wooden brackets of the wall. This brought his hand within a few inches of the broken end of the rope. But it was not this so much as the bracket itself which seemed to engage his attention. Finally he sprang down with an ejaculation of satisfaction.
"It's all right, Watson," said he. "We have got our case, one of the most remarkable in our collection. But, dear me, how slow-witted I have been, and how nearly I have committed blunder in my lifetime. I now think, within a few missing links of my chain, it's almost complete."
Have you got your man?
Man, Watson, man. Only one, but a very formidable person. Strong as a lion, witness to the blow which bent the poker. 6'3" in height, active as a squirrel, dexterous in his fingers, remarkably quick-witted, for the whole ingenious story is his concoction. Yes, Watson, we have come upon the handiwork of a very remarkable individual, and yet the bell rope has given me a clue which should not have left us in doubt.
Well, what was the clue?
Well, if you were to pull down a bell rope, Watson, where would you expect it to break? Surely at the spot that's attached to the wire. Why should it break 3 inches from the top of this, as this one has done?
Because it is frayed there.
Exactly. This end which we examine is frayed. He was cunning enough to do that with his knife, but the other end is not frayed. You could not observe that from here, but if you were on the mantelpiece, you could see that out the clean cut without any mark of fraying whatsoever. If you reconstructed what occurred, the man needed a rope. He would not tear it down for fear of giving the alarm-ringing bell. What did he do? He sprang up on the mantelpiece, could not quite reach it. He put a knee on the bracket, you will see with the impression in the dust, and so he got the knife to bear on the cord. He could not reach the place by at least 3 inches, from which I infer that he is at least 3 inches bigger than I am. Look at that mark upon the seat and the oaken chair. What is it?
Blood.
Undoubtedly it is blood. This alone would put the lady's story out of court. If she were seated in that chair when the crime was done, how comes that mark? No, she was placed in the chair after the death of her husband. I'll wager the black dress shows a corresponding mark of this too. But we have not yet met our Waterloo yet, Watson. And this our Marengo, for it begins in defeat and ends in victory. I should like now to have a few words with the Nurse Teresa. We must be wary for a while, if we are to get the information which we want.
She was an interesting person, this stern Australian nurse. Taciturn, suspicious, ungracious. It took some time before Holmes's pleasant manner and frank appearance of all that she had thawed into her corresponding amiability. She did not attempt to conceal her hatred for her late employer.
Yes, it is true that he threw the decanter at me. I heard him call my mistress a name, and I told him that he would not dare speak to her if her brother had been there. Then it was that he threw it at me. He might have thrown a dozen if he had been but left the bonny bird alone. He was forever ill-treating her, and she too proud to complain. She will not even tell me all that he has done to her. She never told me about those marks on her arm until you saw this morning, but I knew very well that they had come from a stab with a hat-pin. The sly fiend, heaven forgive him that I should speak ill of him now that he is dead, but a fiend he was if ever one walked the earth. He was a whole honey when first we met him, only 18 months ago, and we both feel that if it were 18 years... She had only just arrived to London. Yes, it was her first voyage. She had never been from home before. He won her with his title and his money and his false London ways. If she made a mistake, she was paid for it, if ever a woman did. What month did we meet him? Well, I tell you, it was just after we arrived. We arrived in June, and it was July. They were married in January of last year. Yes, she was down in the morning room again, and I have no doubt she will see you. But you must not ask too much of her, for she has gone through all that flesh and blood still stand.
Lady Brackenstall was reclining in the same couch, but looked brighter than before. The maid had entered with us, and began once more to torment the bruise upon her mistress's brow.
I hope,
said the lady,
that you have not come to cross-examine me again.
No, Holmes answered in his cringed voice.
I will not cause you any unnecessary trouble, Lady Brackenstall, for my whole desire is to make things easy for you. for I am convinced that you are a much tired woman. If you will treat me as a friend and trust me, you may find that I will justify your trust. What do you want me to do? To tell the truth. Mr. Holmes! No, Lady Brackenstall, it is of no use. You may have heard that any little reputation which I possess, I will stake it all on the fact that your story is an absolute fabrication.
You're an impudent fellow, cried Teresa. Do you mean to say that my mistress has told a lie? Holmes rose from his chair.
Have you nothing to tell me? I've told you everything. I think once more, Lady Brackenstall, would it be better to be frank?
For an instant there was a hesitation in her beautiful face. Then some new strong thought crossed it and set it like a mask.
I have told you all I know.
Holmes took his hat and shrugged his shoulders. I'm sorry, said he, and with another word we left the room and the house. There was a pond in the park, and to this my friend led the way. It was frozen over, but a single hole was left in convenience for a solitary swan. Holmes gazed at it, then passed on to the lodge gate. There he scribbled a short note for Stanley Hopkins, and left it with the lodgekeeper.
It may be a hit, or it may be a miss, but we are bound to do something for my friend Hopkins, just to justify the second visit, said he. I will not quite take him into my confidence yet. I think our next scene of operations should be the shipping office of Adelaide's Southampton line, which stands at the end of Pall Mall, if I remember right. There is a second line of steamers which connect South Australia with England, but I will draw the larger cover first.
Holmes's guard sent to the manager ensured instant attention, and he was not long in acquiring all the information which he needed. In June of '95, only one of their line had reached their home port. It was the Rock of Gibraltar, their largest and best boat. A reference to the passenger list showed that Miss Fraser of Adelaide, with her maid, had made the voyage in her. The boat was now on her way to Australia, somewhere to the south of the Suez Canal. Her officers were the same as in '95, with one exception. The first officer, Mr. Jack Croker, who had been made the captain, and was now in charge of the new ship, the Bass Rock, sailing in 2 days' time from Southampton. He lived in Sydenham, and he was likely to be in that morning for his instructions, if we cared to visit him. Now, Mr. Holmes had no desire to see him, but we would be glad to know more about his record and his character. His record was magnificent. There was not an officer in the fleet to touch him. As to his character, he was reliable on duty, but a wild, desperate fellow off the deck to his ship, hot-headed, excitable, and loyal, honest and kind-hearted. That was the path of information which Holmes left to the office of Adelaide Southampton Company. Thence he drove to Scotland Yard, but instead of entering, he sat in his cab and his brows drawn down, lost in profound thought. Finally, he drove to the Charing Cross telegraph office, sent off a message, and then, at last, we made for Baker Street once more.
No, I couldn't do it, Watson, said he, as we re-entered our room. Once that warrant was made, now nothing on earth could save him. Once or twice in my career, I feel that I have done more harm by discovery than the criminal has ever done by harm of his crime. I have learned caution now, and I'd rather play tricks with the law of England than with my own conscience. Let us know a little more before we act.
Before evening, we had a visit from Inspector Stanley Hopkins. Things were not going very well for him.
I believe that you are a wizard, Mr. Holmes. I really do sometimes think that you have powers that are not human. Now, how on earth could you know that the stolen silver was at the bottom of the pond? I didn't know it. But you told me to examine it. You got it, then? Yes, I got it.
I'm very glad if I helped you.
But you haven't helped me. You've made the whole affair worse and more difficult. What sort of burglars are they that they steal silver then throw it into the nearest pond? It was certainly eccentric behavior. I was merely going by the idea that if the silver had been taken by the persons who did not want it, who merely took it for a blind as it were, then they would naturally be anxious to get rid of it. But why such an idea would cross your mind? Well, I thought it was possible. When they came out to the French window, there was a pond, with one tempting little hole in the ice, right in front of their noses. Could there be a better hiding place? Hiding place. That's better, cried Stanley Hopkins. Yes, I see it on now. It was early, and there were folk upon the roads. They were afraid of being seen with the silver, so they sank it in the ponds, intending to return for it when the coast was clear. Excellent, Mr. Holmes. That is better than your idea of the blind. Quite so. Have you got an admirable theory? I have no doubts that my own ideas were quite wild, but you must admit that they ended in discovering the silver. Yes, sir, yes, it was all your doing, but I have had a set of bad luck. A setback? Yes, Mr. Holmes, the Randall gang was arrested in New York this morning. Dear me, Hopkins, that is certainly rather against the theory that they committed the murder in Kent last night. It's fatal, Mr. Holmes, absolutely fatal. Still, there are other gangs of three besides the Randalls, or it may be some new gang which the police have never heard of. Quite so, it's perfectly possible. Where are you off? Yes, Mr. Holmes, there's no rest for me until I've got to the bottom of this business. I suppose you have no hint to give me? I've given you one. Which is? Well, I suggested a blind. But why, Mr. Holmes? Why? That's a question, of course, but I commend the idea to your mind. You might possibly find that there was something in it. You won't stop for dinner. Well, goodbye. Let us know when you get on it.
Dinner was over and the table cleared before Holmes alluded to the matter again. He had lit his pipe and held his slippered feet to the cheerful blaze of the fire. Suddenly he looked at his watch.
I expect developments, Watson.
When?
Now, within a few minutes. Dare I say you thought I acted rather badly to Stanley Hopkins just now?
I trust your judgment.
A very sensible reply, Watson. You must look at it this way. What I know is unofficial. What he knows is official. I have the right to private judgment, and he has the right to none. He must disclose all, or he is a traitor to the service. It is doubtful I would not put him in so painful a position, and so reserve my information, until my own mind is clear upon the matter.
But when will that be?
The time has come. You will now be present at the last scene of a remarkable little drama.
There was a second sound upon the stairs, and our door was opened to admit a fine specimen of manhood as ever passed through it. He was a very tall young man, golden-mustached, blue-eyed, with a skin which had been burned by tropical suns, and a springy step which showed that the huge frame was as active as it was strong. He closed the door behind him, and then he stood with clenched hands and heaving breast, choking down some overmastering emotion.
Sit down, Captain Croker. You got my telegram?
Our visitor sank into an armchair and looked from one to the other of us with questioning eyes.
I got your telegram, and I came as the hour you said. I heard that you had been down to the office. There's no getting away from you. Let's say the worst. What are you going to do to me? Arrest me? Speak out, man. I can't sit here and play with you like cat with a mouse. Give him a cigar, said Holmes. Bite on that, Captain Croker, and don't let your nerves run away with you. I should not sit here smoking with you if I thought you were a common criminal. You may be sure of that. Be frank with me, and we may do some good. Play tricks with me, and I'll crush you. What do you wish me to do? To give me the true account of all that happened in Abbey Grange last night. A true account, mind you, and nothing added or nothing taken off. I know so much already that if you go 1 inch off the straight, I'll blow this police whistle from my window, and the affair will go down in my hands forever.
The sailor thought for a moment. Then he struck his hand with a great sunburned hand.
I'll chance it, he cried. I believe you are a man of your word and a white man, and I'll tell you the whole story. But one thing I'll say first. So far as I'm concerned, I regret nothing and fear nothing, and I would do it all again and be proud of the job. Curse the beast, if he had many lives as a cat, he would owe them all to me. But it's the ladies, Mary Fraser, for never I will call her by that accursed name. When I think of getting her in trouble, and I who would have given my life to just bring one smile from her dear face, it's all that turns my soul to water. And yet, what less could I do? I'll tell you my story, gentlemen, and then I'll ask you as a man to man, what less could I do? I must go back a bit. I see you know everything, so I expect that you know that I met her when she was a passenger and I was first officer on the Rock of Gibraltar. From the first day I met her, she was the only woman to me. Every day of that voyage I loved her more, and many a time since I've knelt down in the darkness of the night watch and kissed the deck of the ship because I knew her dear feet had trod on it. She has never engaged to me. She treated me as fairly as ever a woman treated a man. I have no complaint to make. It was all love on my side and all good comradeship and friendship on hers. When we parted, she was a free woman, and I could never again be a free man. Next time I came back from sea, I heard of her marriage. Well, why shouldn't she marry whom she liked? Title and money, who could carry them better than she? She was born for all that beautiful and dainty. I didn't grieve over her marriage. I was such a selfish hound as that. I just rejoiced that good luck had come her way, and that she had not known herself to be a penniless sailor. That's how I loved Mary Fraser. Well, I never thought to see her again, but last voyage I was promoted, and the new boat was not yet launched, so I had to wait a couple months for my people in Sydenham. One day out of the country lane, I met Teresa Wright, her old maid. She told me about her, about him, about everything. I tell you, gentlemen, it drove me mad. This drunken hound, that he should dare raise a hand to her, and whose boots were not worthy to lick. I met Teresa again, then I met Mary herself, and met her again, and then she would meet me no more. But the other day I had a notice that I was to start my voyage within a week, and I determined that I would see her once more before I left. Teresa was always my friend, for she loved Mary and hated the villain most as much as I did. From her I learned the ways of the house. Mary used to sit reading in her own little room downstairs. I crept round last night and scratched the window. At first she did not open it, but in her heart I know that she now loves me, and she could not leave me in the frosty night. She whispered to me to come round to the big front window, and I found it open before, so let me in by the dining room. Again I heard from her own lips that which made my blood boil, and again I cursed this brute who mishandled the woman I loved. Well, gentlemen, I was standing with her just inside the window, in all innocence as heaven is my judge, and when he rushed in like a madman into the room, called her the vilest name a man could use on a woman, and welted her across the face with the stick he had in his hand. I had sprung for the poker, and it was a fair fight between us. See here on my arm where the first blow fell? Then it was my turn, and I went through him as if he'd been a rotten pumpkin. Do you think I was sorry? Not I. It was his life or mine, but far more than that, it was his life or hers. For how could I leave her in the power of this madman? That was how I killed him. Was I wrong? Well then, what would either of you gentlemen have done if you had been in my position? She had screamed when he struck her, and that brought old Teresa down from the room above. There was a bottle of wine on the sideboard, and I opened it and poured a little between Mary's lips, and she got half dead from the shock. Then I took a drop myself. Teresa as cool as ice, and it was her plot to make as much as mine. We must make it appear the burglars had done this. Teresa kept on repeating our story to her mistress while I swarmed up and cut the rope and bell. Then I lashed her to the chair and frayed out the end of the rope to make it look like all natural, and else they would wonder how the world a burglar would have got up there and cut it. And then I gathered up a few plates and pots of silver and carried out an idea of robbery. And there I left them with the orders to give the alarm when I had a quarter of an hour start. I dropped the silver into the pond and made for Sydenham, feeling that for once in my life I'd done a real good night's work. That's the truth, and the whole truth, Mr. Holmes, if it cost me my neck.
Holmes smoked for some time in silence. Then he crossed the room and shook our visitor by the hand.
That's what I think,
he said.
I know that every word is true, for you have hardly said a word which I did not know. No one but an acrobat or a sailor could have got up to that bell rope from the racket, and no one but a sailor could have made those knots which the cord was fastened to the chair. Only once had this lady been brought into contact with sailors, and that was on her voyage, and it was someone of her own class of life, since she was trying hard to shield him or so showing that she loved him. You see how easy it is for me to lay my hands upon you when once I had started upon the right trail. I thought the police never could have seen such through dodge. Well, the police haven't, nor will they, to the best of my belief. Now look here, Captain Croker. This is a very serious matter, though I am willing to admit that you acted under the most extreme provocation to which any man can be justified. I am not sure that in defense of your own life your action will not be pronounced legitimate. However, that it is for a British jury to decide. Meanwhile, I have such sympathy for you that if I choose to disappear in the next 24 hours, I will promise you that no one will hinder you.
And then it will all come out?
Certainly will come out.
The sailor flushed with anger.
What sort of proposal is that to make a man? Know the law enough to understand that Mary would be an accomplice. Do you think I would leave her alone to face the music while I slunk away? No, sir! Let them do their worst upon me, but for heaven's sake, Mr. Holmes, for some way of keeping my poor Mary out of the courts.
Holmes for a second time held out his hand to the sailor.
I was only testing you, and you ring true every time. Well, it is a great responsibility that I take upon myself, and I have given Hopkins an excellent hint, and if he can't avail himself of it, I can do no more. See here, Captain Croker, we'll do this as due form of law. You are the prisoner. Watson, you are a British jury, and I never met a man who is more eminently fitted to represent one. I am the judge. Now, gentlemen of the jury, you have heard the evidence. Do you find the prisoner guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty, my lord, said I.
Vox populi, vox dei. You are acquitted, Captain Croker. So long as the law does not find some other victim, you are safe from your me. Come back to this lady in a year, and may her future and yours justify us in a long judgment which has been pronounced this very night. Would that be considered a civil court? I mean, if you can make a citizen's arrest, why not have a citizen's court? It was self-defense. Let's see. Do I attempt to do the second story, since this one did almost take an hour? Or do I wait for next week to do the last story in the book? I'd put it up to a vote, but there's only... No. The thing says there's only 2 people in here right now, and Honestly, I don't know who those two are, and I don't know if you'd vote. So, do it. What, go ahead and try to do the second story? I mean, the ads ran during that one. I hate it when the ads interrupt the story. Of course, I don't know who's all subscribers or not, but go ahead and go for it. Okay. I don't think I've seen my timers play. Oh, I've seen the one about the clips. I've got another timer that's supposed to be advertising, doing the Twitch Prime thing that just prevents you from seeing ads everywhere, but let's see, what is the last story? Ah, that story.
The final story of this book from December 1904.
Oh, I like the fact that this actually starts mentioning the previous story. The Adventure of the Second Stain.
I had intended the adventure of the Abbey Grange to be the last of those exploits of my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes, which I should ever communicate to the public. This resolution of mine was not due to any lack of material, since I have notes of many hundreds of cases to which I have never alluded, nor was it caused by any waning interest of my part of the readers and the singular personality and the unique methods of this remarkable man. The real reason lay in the reluctance which Mr. Holmes has shown to the continued publication of his experiences. So long as he is in actual professional practice, the records of his successes were of some practical value to him. But since he has definitely retired from London and betaken himself to the study of bee farming on the Sussex Downs, notoriety has become hateful to him, and he has preemptively requested that his wishes in the matter should be strictly observed. It was only upon my representing to him that I had given a promise that the adventure of the second stain should be published when that times were ripe, and pointing out to him that it's the only appropriate that his long series of episodes should culminate in the most important and international case which he has ever been called upon to handle, that I at last succeeded in obtaining his consent that the carefully guarded account of the incident should at last be laid before the public. In the telling the story, I seem to be somewhat vague in certain details to the public. All readily understand that there is an excellent reason for my reticence. It was, then, in the year 11, even in the decade that shall be nameless, that upon one Tuesday morning in autumn we found two visitors of European fame within the walls of our humble room in Baker Street. The one, austere, high-nosed, eagle-eyed, and dominant, was none other than the illustrious Lord Bellinger, the twice Premier of Britain. The other, dark, clear-cut, and elegant, hardly yet of middle age, and endowed with every beauty of the body and mind, was the Right Honourable Trelawney Hope, Secretary of European Affairs, and the most rising statesman in the country. They sat side by side upon our paper-littered settee, and it was easy to see from their worn and anxious faces that this is business of the most pressing importance which had brought them. The Premier's thin, blue-veined hand was clasped tightly over an ivory head of his umbrella, and his gaunt, ascetic face looked gloomily from Holmes to me. The European Secretary pulled nervously at his moustache and fidgeted with the seals of his waist-chain. When I discovered my loss, Mr. Holmes, it was at 8 o'clock this morning. I was once informed of the Prime Minister, and it was at his suggestion that we both come to see you.
Have you informed the police?
No, sir, said the Prime Minister, with a quick, decisive manner for which he was famous.
We have not done so, nor is it possible that we should do so. To inform the police must, in the long run, mean to inform the public, and this is what we particularly desire to avoid. And why, sir? Because the document in question is of such immense importance that its publication might very easily, I might almost say probably, lead to European complications of the utmost moment. It is not so much to say that the peace or war may hang upon the issue, unless its recovery can be attained with the utmost secrecy, then it may as well not be recovered at all. For all that is aimed by those who have taken it is that the contents should be known generally. I understand. Now, Mr. Trelawney Hope, I should be much obliged if you would tell me exactly the circumstances under which this document disappeared.
That can be done in very few words, Mr. Holmes. The letter, for it was a letter from a foreign potentate, was received 6 days ago. It was of such importance that it never left my side, but I have taken it across each evening to my house in Whitehall Terrace, and kept it in my bedroom in a locked dispatch box. It was there last night, of that I am certain. I actually opened the box while I was dressing for dinner, and saw the document inside. This morning it was gone. The dispatch box had stood beside the glass upon my dressing table all night. I am a light sleeper, and so is my wife. We were both prepared to swear that no one could have entered the room during the night, and yet, I repeat, the paper is gone. What time does this happen? 7:30. How long was it before you went to bed?
My wife and I had just gone to the theater, and I waited up for her. It was 11:30 before we went to the room.
Then 4 hours the dispatch box lay unguarded.
No one is ever permitted into that room save for the housemaid in the morning and my valet or my wife's maid during the rest of the day. They are both trusty servants who have been with us for a long time. Besides, neither of them could possibly have known that there was anything more valuable in that ordinary departmental papers than my dispatch box.
Who did know the existence of the letter?
No one in the house.
Surely your wife knew?
No, sir. I said nothing to my wife until I missed the paper in the morning.
The Premier nodded approvingly.
I have known, sir, how high your sense of public duty, said he, and I am convinced that in this case of the secret, this importance would rise superior to most intimate domestic ties.
The secretary bowed.
You do me no more justice, sir. Until this morning I have never breathed one word to my wife upon this matter.
Could she have guessed?
No, Mr. Holmes, she could not have guessed, nor could anyone have guessed. Have you lost any documents before?
No, sir.
Who is there in England who did not know the existence of this letter?
Each member of the cabinet was informed of it yesterday, but the pledge of secrecy which attends a cabinet meeting was increased by solemn warning which was given by the Prime Minister. Good heavens, to think that within a few hours I should myself have lost it. His handsome face was distorted with a spasm of despair, and his hands tore through his hair. For a moment we caught a glimpse of the natural man, impulsive, ardent, and keenly sensitive. Then the anarchistic mask was replaced, and the gentle voice had returned.
Besides the members of cabinet, there are 2, possibly 3 departmental officials who know of the letter. No one else in England, Mr. Holmes, I assure you.
But abroad?
I believe that no one abroad has seen it save the man who wrote it. I am well convinced that his ministers, that the usual official channels have not been employed.
Holmes considered for some little time.
Now, sir, I must ask you for more particularity which this document is, and why its disappearance should have such momentous consequences.
The 2 statesmen exchanged a quick glance, and the Premier's shaggy eyebrows furrowed together in a frown.
Mr. Holmes, the envelope is a long, thin one of
of pale blue color. There is a seal of red wax stamped with a crouching lion. It is addressed in large, bold handwriting to "I fear less," said Holmes. "That interesting and indeed essential are the details are, the more inquiries must go more to the root of things. What was the letter?" "That is a state secret of the utmost importance, and I fear that I cannot tell you, nor do I see it that it is necessary. If by the aid of the powers which you are said to possess you can find such an envelope, as I describe, and with its enclosure, you will have deserved well for your country, and earned any honor which it lies in our power to bestow." Holmes rose with a smile. "You are two of the most busy men in the country," said he, "and in my own way I have also many good calls upon me. I regret exceedingly that I cannot help you in this matter, and any constitution of this interview will be a waste of my time." The Premier sprang to his feet with that fierce, quick gleam in his deep-set eyes before the cabinet was cowed. "I am not accustomed, sir," he began, but mastered his anger and resumed his seat. For a moment or more there was silence. Then the old statesman shrugged his shoulders. "We must accept your terms, Mr. Holmes. No doubt you are right, and it is unreasonable for us to expect you to act unless we give you our entire confidence." "I agree with you, sir," said the younger statesman. "Then I will tell you, relying entirely upon your honor and that of your colleague, Dr. Watson, I may appeal to your patriotism, for not I could imagine a greater misfortune for our country than this affair should come out. You may safely trust us." "The letter, then, is from a certain foreign potentate who has been ruffled by some recent colonial developments in this country. It has been written hurriedly and upon his own responsibility entirely. Inquiries have been shown that his ministers know nothing of the matter. At the same time, it is couched in a so unfortunate a manner that certain phrases in it are so provocative a character that its publication would undoubtedly lead to the most dangerous state of feeling in this country. There would be such a ferment, sir, that I do not hesitate to say that within a week of the publication of that letter, this country would be involved in a great war." Holmes wrote a name upon a slip of paper, then handed it to the Premier. "Exactly, it was he. And this is the letter. This letter which may well mean the expenditure of 1,000 millions of the lives of hundreds thousands of men, which has become lost in this unaccountable fashion." "Have you informed the sender?" "Yes, sir. A cipher telegram has been dispatched." "Perhaps he desires a publication of the letter." "No, sir. I have strong reason to believe that he already understands that he has acted in an indiscreet and hot-headed manner. It would be a greater blow to him and to his country than to us if this letter were to come out." "If this is so, whose interest is in it that the letter should come out? Why should anyone desire to seal it or to publish it?" "There, Mr. Holmes, you take me into the regions of high international politics. But if you consider the European situation, you will have no difficulty in perceiving the motive. The whole of Europe is an armed camp. There is no double league which makes a fair balance of military power. Great Britain holds the scales. If Britain were driven into war with one confederacy, it would assure the supremacy of the other confederacy, whether they joined in the war or not. Do you follow?" "Very clearly. Then it is the interest of the enemies of this potentate to secure and publish this letter as to make the breach between his country and ours." "Yes, sir." "And to whom would this document be sent if it fell into the hands of the enemy?" "To any of the great chancelleries of Europe. It is probably speeding on its way there in the present instant as fast as the steam can take it." Mr. Trelawney Hope dropped his head to his chest and groaned aloud. The purveyor placed his hand kindly upon his shoulder. It is not your misfortune, my poor fellow. No one can blame you. There is no precaution which you have neglected. Now, Mr. Holmes, you are in full possession of the facts. What course do you recommend?
Holmes shook his head mournfully.
You think, sir, that unless this document is recovered, there will be war?
I think it is very probable.
Then, sir, prepare for war.
That is hard saying, Mr. Holmes.
Consider the facts, sir. It is inconceivable that it was taken after 11:30 at night, since I understand that Mr. Hope and his wife were both in the room from that hour until the loss was found out. It was taken then yesterday evening between 7:30 and 11:30, probably near the earlier hour, since whoever took it evidently knew that it was there and would naturally secure it as early as possible. Now, sir, if the document of this importance were taken at that hour, where can it be now? And no one has any reason to retain it. It has been passed readily on to those who need it. What chance have we to overtake or even trace it? It is beyond our reach.
The Prime Minister rose from the settee. What you say is perfectly logical, Mr. Holmes. I feel that the matter is indeed out of our hands.
Let us presume, for argument's sake, that the document was taken by the maid or by the valet.
They are both friends, trusted, tried servants.
I understand you say that your room is on the second floor, and that there is no entrance from without, and that from within no one could go up unobserved. It must be, then, that somebody in the house who has taken it, to whom the thief would take it. No one of several international spies and security agents, whose names are tolerably familiar to me. There are three who may be said to be the heads of their profession. It will begin my search by going round and finding if each of them has at his post. If one is missing, especially if he has disappeared since last night, we will have some indication as to where the document has gone.
Why should he be missing? Asked the European Secretary. He would take the letter to the embassy in London, as likely as not.
I fancy not. These agents work independently, and the relations with the embassies are often strained.
The Prime Minister nodded with his acquiescence. I believe you're right, Mr. Holmes. He would take so valuable a prize to the headquarters with his own hands. I think that your course of action is an excellent one. Meanwhile, Hope, we cannot neglect our other duties on account of this one misfortune. Should there be any fresh developments during the day, we shall communicate with you, and you will no doubt let us know the results of your own inquiries. The two statesmen bowed and walked gravely from the room. When our illustrious visitors had departed, Holmes lit his pipe in silence, and sat for some time lost in the deepest thought. I had opened the morning paper, which had immersed a sensational crime which had occurred in London the night before, when my friend gave an exclamation, sprang to his feet, and laid his pipe upon the mantelpiece. "Yes," said he, "there's no better way to approaching it. The situation is desperate, but not hopeless. Even now, if we could be sure which of them has taken it, it is possible that it has not yet passed out of his hands. After all, it is a question of money with these fellows, and I have the British Treasury behind me. If it's on the marketplace, I'll buy it, if it means another penny of income tax. It is conceivable that the fellow might hold it back to see what bids come from the side before he tries his luck on others. There are only 3 of those capable of playing so bold a game. They are Obstetine, Latrosse, and Eduardo Lucas. I will see each of them." I glanced at my own paper. "Is that Eduardo Lucas of Godolphin Street?" "Yes." "You will not see him." "Why not?" "He was murdered in his house last night." My friend was so often astonished me for the course of our adventures that it was with some sense of exultation that I now realized how completely I had astonished him. He stared in amazement, and then snatched the paper from my hands. This was the paragraph which I had just been engaged in reading when he rose from his chair. Murder in Westminster. A crime of mysterious character was committed last night at 16 Godolphin Street, one of the old-fashioned and secluded rows of 18th-century houses which lie between the river and the Abbey, almost in the shadow of the great tower of the Houses of Parliament. This small but select mansion has been inhabited for some years by Mr. Eduardo Lucas, well known to the society circles both on account of his charming personality and because he has a well-deserved reputation of being one of the most amateur tenors in the country. Mr. Lucas is an unmarried 34 years of age. His establishments consists of Mrs. Pringle, an elderly housekeeper, and of Mitten, his valet. The former retires early and sleeps at the top of the house. The valet was out at evening visiting a friend in Hammersmith. From 10 o'clock onwards, Mr. Lucas had the house to himself. What occurred during that time has not yet transpired, but 11:45, Police Constable Barrett, passing along Godolphin Street, observed the door of 16 was ajar. He knocked, but receiving no answer, perceiving a light in the front room, he advanced into the passage and again knocked, without reply. Then he pushed open the door and entered. The room was in a state of wild disorder, the furniture being all swept to one side, and one chair lying on its back in the center. Besides this chair, and still grasping at one of its legs, lay the unfortunate tenant of the house. He had been stabbed to the heart, and must have died instantly. The knife in which the crime had been committed was a curved Indian dagger, plucked down from the trophy of ornamental arms, which adorned one of the walls. The robbery does not appear to have been the motive of the crime, for there had been no attempts to remove the valuable contents of the room. Mr. Eduardo Lucas was well known and popular for his violent and mysterious fate, will arouse a painful interest and intense sympathy in a widespread circle of friends.
"Well, Watson, what do you make of this?"
asked Holmes after a long pause. "It is an amazing coincidence."
"A coincidence? Here is one of the three men whom had named possible actions of the drama, and he meets a violent death within the very hours in which the drama has been enacted. The odds are enormous against this being coincidence. No figures could express them. No, my dear Watson, the two events are connected, must be connected. It is for us to find the connection."
"But now the official police must know all."
"Not at all. They know all they see at Godolphin Street. They know, or shall know, nothing of Whitehall Terrace. Only we know of both events, and we can trace the relation between them. There is one obvious point which would, in any case, have turned my suspicion to Lucas. Godolphin Street, Westminster, is only a few minutes from the Whitehall Terrace. The other secret agents whom I have named live in the extreme West End. It was easier, therefore, for Lucas than the others to establish a connection to receive the message of the European Secretary's household. A small thing, and yet, where events were compressed into a few hours, it may prove essential. Hallo, what have we here?"
Mrs. Hudson appeared with a lady's card upon her salver. Holmes glanced at it and raised his eyebrows and handed it over to me.
"Ask Lady Hilda Trelawney Hope if she will be so kind to step up," said he.
A moment later, our modest apartment, already so distinguished in the morning, was further honored by the entrance of the most lovely lit woman in London. I had often heard of the beauty of the youngest daughter of the late Duke of Belminster, but no description of it, and no contemplation of colourless photographs had prepared me for the subtle, delicate charm and the beautiful colouring of exquisite head. And yet, as we saw it that autumn morning, it was not its beauty which would be the first thing to impress the observer. The cheek was lovely, but it was paled with emotion. The eyes were bright, but it was brightless of fever. The sensitive mouth was as tight and drawn as efforts at self-command. Terror, not beauty, was the first sprang to the eye of a fair visitor stood framed for an instant in the open door.
"Has my husband been here, Mr. Holmes?"
"Yes, madam. He was here before."
"Mr. Holmes, I implore you not to tell him that I came here."
Holmes's bowed coldly and motioned the lady to the chair.
Your ladyship places me in a very delicate position. I beg that you sit down and tell me what you desire, but I fear that I cannot make any unconditional promise.
She swept across the room and seated herself with her back to the window. It was a queenly presence, tall, graceful, intensely womanly.
Mr. Holmes,
said she, with her white-gloved hands clasped and unclasped as she spoke.
I will speak frankly to you in the hope that it may induce you to speak frankly in return. I hear the complete confidence between my husband and me on all matters save one. The one is politics. On this his lips are sealed. He tells me nothing. Now, I am aware that there is a most deplorable occurrence in our house last night. I know that a paper has disappeared, but because the matter is political, my husband refuses to take me into his complete confidence. Now it is essential, I say, that I should thoroughly understand it. You are the only other person, save these politicians, who know the true facts. I beg you, then, Mr. Holmes, to tell me exactly what has happened and what it will lead to. Tell me, Mr. Holmes. Let no regard for your client's interests keep you silent, for I assure you that in his interests, if you would only see it, would be best served by taking me into his complete confidence. What was this paper that was stolen?
Madam, what you ask me is really impossible. She groaned and sank her face into her hands.
You must see that it is so, madam. If your husband thinks fit to keep you in the dark of this matter, it is for me, who have only learned the true facts under the pledge of professional secrecy, to tell that he has withheld. It is not fair to ask it. It is him whom you must ask.
I have asked him. I come to you as the last resource. But without your telling me anything definite, Mr. Holmes, you may do me a great service if you would enlighten me on one point.
What is it, madam?
Is my husband's political career likely to suffer through this incident?
Well, madam, unless it is set right, it may certainly have a very unfortunate effect.
She drew in her breath sharply, as one whose doubts were resolved.
One more question, Mr. Holmes. From an expression which my husband dropped in the first shock of the disaster, I understood that terrible public consequences may arise from the loss of this document.
If he said so, I certainly cannot deny it.
Of what nature are they?
Nay, madam, there again you ask me more than I can possibly answer.
Then I will take up no more of your time. I cannot blame you, Mr. Holmes, for having refused to speak more freely, and you on your side will not, I am sure, think the worse of me because I desire, even against his own will, to share my husband's anxieties. Once more I beg that you will say nothing of my visit.
She looked back at us from the door, and I had the last impression that the beautiful haunted face, the startled eyes, and the drawn mouth. And then she was gone.
Now, Watson, the fair sex is your department,
said Holmes with a smile when the dwindling frou-frou of skirts had ended in the slam of the front door.
What was the fair lady's game? What does she really want?
Surely your own statement is clear and her anxiety very natural.
Think of her appearance, Watson, her manner, her suppressed excitement, her restlessness, her tenacity in asking the same questions. Remember that she comes from a caste who do not lightly show emotion.
She was certainly much moved.
Remember also the curious earnestness with which she assured that it was best for her husband that she should not, so that she should know all. What did she mean by that? And you must have observed, Watson, how she maneuvered to have the light at her back. She did not wish us to read her expression.
Yes, she chose the one chair in the room.
And yet her motives of women are so inscrutable. You remember the woman in Margate, whom I suspected for the same reason? No powder on her nose. She proved that to be the correct solution. How can you build on such quicksand? The most trivial action mean volumes, and the most extraordinary conduct may depend upon a hairpin or curling tongs. Good morning, Watson.
Are you off?
Yes, I will while away the morning at Godolphin Street with our friends in the regular establishment. With Eduardo Lucas lies in the solution of our problem, though I must admit I have not taken an inkling as to what form it may take. It is a capital mistake to theorize in advance of the facts. Do stay on guard, my good Watson, and receive any fresh visitors. I'll join you at lunch if I am able.
All that day and the next, Holmes was in a mood which his friends would call taciturn and others morose. He ran in and ran out, smoked incessantly, played snatches on his violin, sank into reveries, devoured sandwiches at irregular hours, and hardly answered the casual question which I put to him. It was evident to me that the things were not going well with him or his quest. He would say nothing of the case, and it was from the papers that I learned the particulars of the inquest, and the rest of the subsequent release of John Mitten, the valet from the deceased. The coroner's jury brought in the obvious, willful murder, but the parties remained as unknown as ever. No motive was suggested. The room was full of articles of value, and none had been taken. The dead man's papers had not been tampered with. They were carefully examined and shown that he had a keen student of the international policies and an invaluable gossip, a remarkable linguist, and an untiring letter writer. He had been on intimate terms with the leading politicians for several countries, but nothing sensational was discovered among the documents which filled his drawers. As for the relationship with women, they appeared to have been promiscuous but superficial. He had many acquaintances, among them but few friends, and no one whom he loved. His habits were regular, his conduct inoffensive. His death was an absolute mystery, and likely to remain so. As to the arrest of James Mitten, the valet, it was the counsel of despair as an alternative and absolute inaction. But no case could be sustained against him. He had visited his friends in Hammersmith that night. The alibi was complete. It was true that he started home at an hour which should have brought him at Westminster before the time when the crime was discovered, but his own explanation that he had walked part of the way seemed probable enough in the view of the imminence of the night. He had actually arrived at 12 o'clock, and appeared to be overwhelmed by the unexpected tragedy. He had always been on good terms with his master. Several of the dead man's possession, notably a small case of razors, had been found in the valet's boxes, but he explained that they had been presents from the deceased. And the housekeeper was able to corroborate the story. Mitten had been in Lucas's employment for 3 years. It was noticeable that Lucas did not take Mitten on the commitment with him. Sometimes he visited Paris for 3 months on end, but Mitten was left in charge of the Godolphin Street house. As to the housekeeper, she had heard nothing on the night of the crime. If her master had a visitor, he had himself admitted him. So for 3 mornings the mystery remained, so far as I could follow in the papers. If Holmes knew, he kept more to his counsel. But as he told me, the Inspector Lestrade had taken him into the confidence of the case. I knew that he was in close touch with early development. Upon the 4th day there appeared a long telegram in the Paris, which seemed to solve the whole question. A discovery has been made by the Parisian police, said the Daily Telegraph, which raises the veil which hung around the tragic fate of Mr. Eduardo Lucas, who met his death by violence Monday night at Godolphin Street, Westminster. Our readers will remember that the deceased gentleman was found stabbed in his room, and that some suspicion attached to his valet, but that case broke down as an alibi. Yesterday, a lady who had been known as Mime, Minister Foray, occupied a small villa in Rue Austerès, was reported to the authorities by her servants as being insane. An examination showed that she had indeed developed a mania of a dangerous and permanent form. On the inquiry of the police had discovered that Madame Henri Fournier only returned from a journey to London on Tuesday night, and there was evidence to connect her with the crime at Westminster. A comparison of photographs has proved conclusively that Madame Henri Fournier and Eduardo Lucas were really one and the same person, and they deceased to have some reason lived a double life in London and Paris. Madame Forte, who was a Creole of origin, is of only extremely excitable nature and is justified in the past from attacks of jealousy and amounted to frenzy. It is conjectured that it is one of these she committed the terrible crime which caused such a sensation in London. Her movements upon the Monday night might have been traced if undoubtedly the woman answering her description attracted such attention at Charing Cross Station on Tuesday morning by a witness as the appearance and violence of her gestures. It is probable, therefore, that the crime was either committed when insane, or that its immediate effect was to drive the unhappy woman out of her mind. At present she is unable to give any coherent account of the past, and the doctors hold out no hopes at the re-establishment of her reason. There is evidence that a woman who might have been Madame Fournier was seen at some hours on Monday night watching a house in Godolphin Street. What do you think of that, Holmes? I read the account aloud to him while he finished his breakfast. My dear Watson, said he as he rose from the table and paced about up and down the room, you are most long-suffering, but if I have told you nothing in the past 3 days, it is because there is nothing to tell. Even now, this report from Paris does not help us much. Surely it is the final in regards to the man's death. The man's death is a mere incident, a trivial episode, in comparison with our real task, which is to trace the document and save the European catastrophe. Only one important thing has happened in the last few days, and that is nothing has happened. I get reports almost hourly from the government, and it is certain that nowhere in Europe is there any sign of trouble. Now, if this letter were loose, no, it can't be loose. But if it isn't loose, where can it be? Who has it? Why is it held back? That's a question that beats my brain like a hammer. It was indeed a coincidence that Lucas should meet his death on the night that the letter disappeared. Did the letter ever reach him? If so, why is it not among his papers? Did this mad wife of his carry it off with her? If so, is it in her house in Paris? How could I search for it without the French police suspecting having their suspicion raised? It is a case, my dear Watson, where the law is as dangerous as the criminals are. Every man's hand is against us, and yet the interests at stake are colossal. Should I bring it to a successful conclusion, it will certainly represent the crowning glory of my career. And here it is, my latest from the front. Holmes glanced hurriedly at the note which had been handed in. Hello, Lestrade seems to have observed something of interest. Put on your hat, Watson, and we will stroll down together to Westminster. It was my first visit to the scene of the crime, a high, dingy, narrow-chested house. Prim, formal, and solid, like a century which gave it birth. Lestrade's bulldog features gazed out at us from the front window, and he greeted us warmly when the big constable had opened the door to let us in. The room in which we were drawn was that in which the crime had been committed, but no trace of it now remained, save for an ugly, irregular stain upon the carpet. This carpet was a small, square drugget of the center of the room, surrounded by a broad expanse of beautiful, old-fashioned wood flooring and square blocks highly polished. Over the fireplace was a magnificent trophy of weapons, one of which had been used that tragic night. And the window was a sumptuous writing desk, and every detail of the apartment, the pictures, the rugs, and the hangings, all pointed to a taste which was luxurious to the verge of effeminacy. Seen the Paris news? Asked Lestrade. Holmes nodded. Our French friend seemed to have touched the spot this time. No doubt it's just as I say. She knocked at the door, surprise visits, I guess, for he kept the life of tight water compartments. He let her in, couldn't keep her in the street. She told him how she had traced him, reproached him. One thing led to another, and then that dagger was so handy at the end soon came. It wasn't all done in an instant, though, for these chairs were all swept over yonder, and he had one in his hand as if he had tried to hold her off with it. We've got it all as clear as if we had been seeing it. Holmes raised his eyebrows.
And yet, you have sent for me.
Ah, yes, that's another matter, a mere trifle, but the sort of thing you take an interest in. Queer, you know, and what you might call freakish. It has nothing to do with the main fact, can't have on the face of it.
What is it, then?
Well, you know, after a crime of this sort, it's very careful to keep things in their position. Nothing has been moved. Officer in charge here night and day this morning as the man was buried and the investigation over. So far as the room is concerned, we thought we could tidy up a bit. This carpet, you see. It is not the fashion down. It is only just laid there. We had a station to raise it, and we found... Yes, you found?
Holmes's face grew tense with anxiety.
Well, I'm sure you would have never guessed in 100 years what we found. And, you see the stain on the carpet? Well, a great deal must have soaked through, must it not?
Undoubtedly it must.
Well, you'll be surprised to hear that there's no stain on the white woodwork underneath to correspond.
No stain? There must be.
Yes, you would say that, but the fact remains that there isn't.
He took a corner of the carpet in his hand, and turning it over, he showed that it was indeed as he said.
But the underside is stained as the upper. It must have left a mark.
Strud chuckled with delight at having puzzled the famous expert.
Now I'll show you the explanation. There is a second stain, but it does not correspond with the other. See for yourself.
As he spoke, he turned over another portion of the carpet, and there, sure enough, was a great crimson spill upon the square white facing of the old-fashioned floor.
What do you make of it, Mr. Holmes?
Why, it is simple enough. Two stains did correspond, but the carpet has been turned around, as if the square had been unfastened, as it is easily done.
The official police don't need you, Mr. Holmes, to tell you that the carpet must have been turned around. That's clear enough, for the stains lie above each other, if you lay it this other way. But what I say is, I want to know who shifted it and why.
I could see from Holmes's rigid face that he was vibrating with inward excitement.
Look here, Lestrade, he said. Has the constable in the passage been in charge over the place the whole time?
Yes, he has.
Well, take my advice. Examine him carefully. Don't do it before us. We'll wait here. You take him to the back of the room. You'll be more likely to get confession out of him alone. Ask him how he dared to admit people and leave him alone in this room. Don't ask him if he has done it. Take it for granted. Tell him you know someone has been here. Press him. Tell him that the full confession is his only chance for forgiveness. Do exactly what I told you.
By George, if he knows, I'll have it out with him,
cried Lestrade. He darted out into the hall, and for a few moments later his bullying voice sounded in the back room.
Now, Watson, now,
cried Holmes with a fevered eagerness. All the demoniacal force of the man masked behind the listless manner burst out into a paroxysm of energy. He tore the drugget from the floor. In an instant he was down on his hands and knees, clawing at each of the squares of wood beneath it. One turned sideways as he dug his nails into the edge of it. It hinged back like a lid of a box. A small black cavity opened beneath it. Holmes plunged his eager hand into it, and with it he drew back a snarl of anger and disappointment. It was empty.
Quick, Watson, quick! Get it back again.
The wooden lid was replaced, and the Duchess had only just been drawn straight when Lestrade wrote. His voice was heard in the passage. He found Holmes leaning languidly against the mantelpiece, resigned and patient, endeavoring to conceal his irrepressible yawn.
Sorry to keep you waiting, Mr. Holmes. I can see that you're bored to death with the whole affair. Well, he's confessed, all right. Come in here, Miss Pearson. Let these gentlemen hear your most inscrutable conduct.
The big constable, hot and penitent, sidled into the room.
I meant no harm, sir, I'm sure. The young woman came to the door last evening, mistook the house, she did. And then we got talking. It's lonesome, and when you're on duty all day...
Well, what happened?
She wanted to see the scene where the crime was done. Had read about it in the papers and said she was very respectable and well-spoken young woman, sir, and I saw no harm in letting her have a peep. When she saw the mark on the carpet, she was dropped on the floor and lay as if she was dead. I ran to the back and got some water, but I could not bring it to her. And then I went around to the corner of the ivy plant for some brandy, and by the time I had brought back, the young woman had recovered and was off, ashamed of herself, I dare say, and dared not to face me. How about moving the drugget? Oh, sir, it was rumpled a bit, certainly, when I was back. You see, she fell on it, and it lies in the polished floor, so nothing to keep it in place. I straightened it out for afterwards. It's a lesson that you should do yourself. You can't deceive me, Constable MacPherson, said Lestrade with dignity. No doubt you thought you could breach your duty and never discover that the mere glance at the drugget was enough to evidence that someone had been admitted into the room. It's lucky for you, young man, that nothing is missing, or you would find yourself in Queer Street. I'm going to have you called down for over such petty business, Mr. Holmes, but I thought the point of the second stain not corresponding with the first would interest you. Certainly it was most interesting. Has this woman only been here once, Constable? Yes, sir, only once. Who was she? Didn't know the name, sir. Was answering an advertisement about typewriting and came in the wrong number. Very pleasant, genteel young woman. Tall? Handsome? Yes, sir, she was a well-grown young woman. I suppose you might say she was handsome. Perhaps some would say she was very handsome. Oh, officer, do let me have a peep, says she. She had a pretty coaxing way, as you might say, and I thought there was no harm in letting her just put her head in through the door. How was she dressed? Quiet, sir, a long mantle down to her feet. What time was it? It was growing dusk at the time. They were lighting the lamps as I came back with the brandy. Very good, said Holmes. Come, Watson. I think that we have more important work elsewhere. As we left the house, Lestrade remained in the front room while the repentant constable opened the door to let us out. Holmes turned on the step and held up something in his hand. The constable glared intently. Good Lord, sir, he said with amazement on his face. Holmes put a finger on his lips, replaced his hand to his breast pocket, and burst out laughing as we turned down the street. Excellent, he said. Come, friend Watson. The curtain rings up more than the last act. You will be relieved to hear that there will be no war, and the Right Honourable Trelawney Hope will suffer no setback in his brilliant career. That it was indiscreet sovereign who will receive no punishment for his indiscretion. That the Prime Minister will have no European complications to deal with, and that with a little tact and management upon our part, nobody will be a penny for the worse for what might have been a very ugly incident. My mind filled with admiration for this extraordinary man. You've solved it, I cried. Hardly that, Watson. There are some points at which are dark as ever, but we have so much that it will be in our favour that if we cannot get rest, we will go straight to Whitehall Terrace and bring the matter to a head. When we arrived at the residence of the European Secretary, it was Lady Hilda Trelawney Hope that Sherlock Holmes inquired. We were shown into the morning room. Mr. Holmes, said the lady, and her face was pink with indignation. This is surely most unfair and ungenerous upon your part. I desired, as I have explained, to keep my visit with you a secret, lest my husband should think I was intruding into his affairs. And yet you compromised me by coming here and showing that you have the business relations between us. Unfortunately, madam, I have no positive alternative. I have been commissioned to recover this immensely important paper. I must therefore ask you, madam, to be kind enough to place it in my hands. The young lady sprang to her feet, with the colour all dashed in an instant from her beautiful face. Her eyes glazed, she tottered, and I thought that she would faint. Then, with a grand effort, she rallied from the shock,
and the supreme astonishment and indignation chased every other expression from her face.
You insult me, Mr. Holmes.
Come, madam, it is useless. Give up the letter.
She darted for the bell.
The butler shall show you out.
Do not linger, Lady Hilda. If you do, then all my earnest efforts to avoid a scandal will be frustrated. Give up the letter, and all will be set right. If you will work with me, I can arrange everything. If you work against me, I must expose you.
She stood grandly defiant, a queenly figure, her eyes fixed upon us as if he could read his very soul. Her hand was on the bell, but she had forborne to ring it.
You are trying to frighten me. It is not a very manly thing, Mr. Holmes, to come here and browbeat a woman. You say that you know something. What is it that you know?
Pray, sit down, madam. You will hurt yourself if you fall. I will not speak until you sit down. Thank you.
I give you 5 minutes, Mr. Holmes.
One is enough, Lady Hilda. I know of your visit to Eduardo Lucas, of your giving him this document, and of your ingenious return to the room last night, in which maneuver you took the letter from the hiding place under the carpet.
She stared at him with an ashen face and gulped twice before she could speak.
You are mad, Mr. Holmes. You are mad,
she cried at last. He drew a small piece of cardboard from his pocket. It was the face of a woman cut out of a portrait.
I have carried this because I thought you might find it useful, he said. The policeman has recognized it.
She gave a gasp and her head dropped back in her chair.
Come, Lady Hilda. You have the letter. The matter may still be adjusted. I have no desire to bring you to trouble. My duty ends when I have returned the lost letter to your husband. Take my advice and be frank with me. It is your only chance.
Her courage was admirable. Even now she could not own defeat.
I tell you again, Mr. Holmes, that you are under some absurd illusion.
I am sorry for you, Lady Hilda. I have done my best for you. I can see now that all was in vain.
He rang the bell. The butler entered.
Is Mr. Trelawney Hope at home?
He will be home, sir, at 1:15. Holmes glanced at his watch.
Still a quarter of an hour, he said. Very good, I shall wait.
The butler had hardly closed the door behind him when Lady Hilda was down on her knees at Holmes's feet, her hands outstretched, her beautiful face upturned and wet with her tears.
Oh, spare me, Mr. Holmes, spare me,
she pleaded in a frenzy of supplication.
For heaven's sake, don't tell him. I love him so I would not bring one shattered into his life, and I know this would break his noble heart.
Holmes raised the lady.
I am thankful, madam, that you have come to your senses, even at this last moment. There is not an instant to lose. Where is the letter?
She darted across to the writing desk, unlocked it, and drew out the long blue envelope.
Here it is, Mr. Holmes. Would to heaven that I would never seen it.
How can we return it? Holmes muttered. Quick, we must think of some way. Is there a dispatch box?
Still in his bedroom.
What a stroke of luck. Quick, madam, bring it in here.
A moment later she had reappeared with the flat box in her hands.
How did you open it? You have a duplicate key. Yes, of course you have. Open it.
From out of her bosom, Lady Hilda drew a small key. The box flew open. It was stuffed with papers. Holmes thrust the blue envelope deep down in the heart of them, between the leaves of some other document. The box was shut, locked, and returned to the bedroom.
Now we are ready for him, said Holmes. We still have 10 minutes. I'm going far to screen you, Lady Hilda. In return, you will spend the time telling me frankly the real meaning of this extraordinary affair.
Mr. Holmes, I will tell you everything,
cried the lady.
Oh, Mr. Holmes, I would cut my right hand off before I gave him some moment of sorrow. There's no woman in London who loves her husband as I do, and yet if he knew what I have acted, how I have been compelled to act, he would never forgive me, for his own honor stands so high that he would not forget to pardon the lapse of another. Help me, Mr. Holmes. My happiness, my very lives are at stake.
Quick, madam. The time grows short.
It was a letter of mine, Mr. Holmes, an indiscreet letter written before my marriage. A foolish letter, a letter of an impulsive young girl. I meant no harm, and yet he would have thought it criminal. Had he read that letter, his confidence would have been forever destroyed. It is years since I wrote it. I thought that the whole matter was forgotten. And then I was last heard from this man, Lucas, that it had passed into his hands, and that he would lay it before the husband. I implored his mercy. It said that he would return the letter, which it would bring him a certain document which is described in my husband's dispatch box. He had some spy in the office that had told him of his existence. It showed me that no harm would come to my husband. Put yourself in my position, Mr. Holmes. What was I to do?
Take your husband into your confidence.
I could not, Mr. Holmes, I could not. On one side seemed certain ruin, on the other terrible as it seemed to take my husband's paper. Still, in a matter of politics, I could not understand the consequences, while in the matter of love and trust they were only too clear to me. I did it, Mr. Holmes. I took an impression of his key. This man Lucas furnished the duplicate. I opened his dispatch box, took the paper, and conveyed it to Godolphin Street.
What happened there, madam?
I tapped on the door as agreed. Lucas opened it, and I followed him into the house, leaving the hall behind and the door behind me, for I feared to be alone with the man. I remember that there was a woman outside as I entered. My business was soon done. I had my letter on the desk. I handed him the document. He gave me the letter. At this instant there was a sound at the door. There were a few steps in the passage. Lucas quickly turned back to the document into some hiding place there, and I covered it over. What happened after this was the same as a fearful dream. I have sworn a woman of the dark, frantic voice, a woman's voice, which screamed in French, "My waiting is not in vain, unless I have found you with her." There was a savage struggle. I saw him with a chair in his hand. The knife gleamed in hers. I rushed from the horrid scene and ran to the house. The next morning, the papers, did I learn of the dreadful result. That night I was happy, for I had my letter. I had not seen yet what the future would bring. It was next morning when I realized that I had only exchanged one trouble for another. My husband's anguish at the loss of his paper went to my heart. I could hardly prevent myself from kneeling down at his feet and telling him that what I had done. But that again would mean a confession of my past. I came to you this morning in order to understand the full enormity of my offense. From the instant that I grasped it, my whole mind was turned to the one thought of getting the papers back. It must still be there where Lucas had placed it, for it concealed before his dreadful woman entered the room. If it had not been for her coming, I should have not known where the place of his hiding place was. How was I to get into the playroom? For a moment, days, I watched the place, but the door was never open. Last night I made the attempt. What I did and how I succeeded you have already learned. I brought the paper back with me and thought of destroying it, since I would see no way of returning it without confessing my guilt to my husband. Heavens, I hear a step on the stair.
The European secretary burst excitedly into the room. "What news, Mr. Holmes? Any news?" he cried. "I have some hopes."
"Ah, thank heaven!" His face became radiant. "The Prime Minister is lunching with me. May we share your hopes? He has nerves of steel, and yet I hope that he has hardly slept since the terrible event. Jacobs, will you ask the Prime Minister to come up? As for you, dear, I fear that this is a matter of politics. Will you join me in a few minutes in the dining room?"
The Prime Minister was subdued, and I could see from the gleam in his eyes and the twitching of his bony hands that he shared the excitement of his young colleague.
"I understand you have something to report, Mr. Holmes?"
"Purely negative as yet. My friend answered. I've inquired at every point where it might be, and I am sure that there is no danger to be apprehended."
"But that is not enough, Mr. Holmes. We cannot live than ever for such a volcano. We must have something definite.
I am in hopes of getting it. That is why I'm here. I think the more I think of it, the matter is more convinced that I am sure that the letter has never left this house.
Mr. Holmes!
If it had, it would certainly have been public by now.
But why would anyone take it in order to keep it in this house?
I'm not convinced that anyone did take it. Then how would it leave the dispatch box? I am convinced that it never did leave the dispatch box.
Mr. Holmes, this joking is very ill-timed. We have my assurance that it left the box.
Have you examined the box since Tuesday morning?
No, it was not necessary.
You have conceivably have overlooked it.
Impossible, I say.
But I am convinced that I have known such things to happen. I presume there are other papers there. Well, it might have gotten mixed in with them.
It was on top of my box.
Someone may have shaken the box and displaced it.
No, I had that everything out.
Surely it is easily decided.
Hope, said the Prime Minister. Let us have the dispatch box brought in. The secretary rang the bell. Jacobs, bring down my dispatch box. This is a farcical waste of time, but still, if anything else will satisfy you, we'll be done.
Thank you, Jacobs. Put it here. I always have the key in my watch chain. Here are the papers, you see. A letter from Lord Morrow, report from Sir Charles Hardy, a memorandum from Belgrade, a note on the Russo-German grain taxes, a letter from Madrid, a note from Lord Flowers.
Good heavens! What is this? Lord Bellinger! Lord Bellinger! The Prime Minister snatched the blue envelope from his hand. Yes, this is it. This is the letter intact. Hope, I congratulate you.
Thank you. What a weight from my heart.
This is inconceivable, Mr. Holmes. You are a wizard, a sorcerer. How did you know it was in there?
Because I knew it was nowhere else.
I can't believe my eyes. He wildly ran to the door. Where is my wife? I must tell her that all is well. Hilda! Hilda! We heard his voice on the stairs. The Premier looked at Holmes with twinkling eyes.
Come, sir, said he. There is more in this than meets the eye. How came the letter back into the box?
Holmes turned away, smiling from his keen scrutiny of those wonderful eyes.
We also have our diplomatic secrets,
said he, and picking up his hat, he turned to the door. And thus concludes the final story in the book Return of Sherlock Holmes. I do hope that everyone did enjoy the time, and that every question has been finally answered for this book. I do feel that the next book, his final farewell, no, his final bow, I believe is the title of it, will entrance you as much as this current one did. It is, of course, a book of many chapters as opposed to those of the short stories. And I should now try to keep myself from continuing the Watson voice, despite it being one of my most favorite to do. But really, it's... each of those stories took roughly an hour. But now I should see who is on that I might be able to read. Actually, I do see another storyteller whom I do often admire. So let us see what she is doing.
though I know what she's doing. She's reading a book. She's reading The Magic of Oz. Ah, I have not done much of the Oz series. At least I haven't streamed the Oz series. I have recorded some of them. But, as it were, these are the raid messages which I have for both followers and for subscribers. I found out that the one on the subscribers can only be used by followers in this room, which kind of actually sucks. But still, we will go see what Lady Sophia Ignacy is doing today. Because I can actually type her name. So, once again, my wonderful readers, lurkers, and listeners, I shall bid you adieu for the evening, and we shall return tomorrow evening for more Friday night fairy tales from the Green Fairy Book. If you have seen my Twitch post and want me to drink absinthe, you must contribute, because I cannot afford that shit on my own. Honestly, I don't really need to drink when I'm reading. But I figured it's the Green Fairy Book. Drinking some of the Green Fairy would just be amusing at the same time. And as much as I like alcohol, I can't spend $40 on a bottle. Even though the one that I took a picture of with the picture of Van Gogh on it, it comes with a spoon, which I was rather impressed to see in the packaging. That's $45. But again, I don't expect anyone to contribute. So anyway, we're about to get kicked out of the raid, so I might as well switch over to this closing screen. And again, I hope that you all have a wonderful evening, and join us again tomorrow.